What's the scariest science fact that the public knows nothing about? Story 1. For 2 days in September of 1859, a massive solar flare, coronal mass ejection, powerful enough to make hanging telegraph lines burst into flames from the induced current washed over the Earth. Another massive burst in 2012 only just missed Earth, but it's not going to be pretty when our luck runs out on this. We have telegraph operator logs from back then. The Carrington event. They could use their equipment unplugged. There was so much induced current. Story 2. Scientific literature's conclusion on Alzheimer's disease and other neurodegenerative diseases in general is that the diseases start decades before the first obvious symptoms and that we need to treat them at this stage. When you exhibit obvious symptoms, it's too late. Your brain is already mush. If you get diagnosed with Alzheimer's at 65, you have had the disease since your early 40s at least, and you experienced very mild symptoms but didn't notice it, and your brain fought like hell to compensate for the deficit. When you get diagnosed, your brain is already very severely damaged and will never recover from the deficit. Story 3. CO2 levels are causing the pH levels in the ocean to move towards an acidic level. No, not like burning yourself acid, but just enough that it's causing an already noticeable impact on microorganisms at the bottom of the food chain. This may eventually lead to an ecological collapse. It seems to be impacting phytoplankton, which is responsible for producing a good chunk of the air you breathe as well. If the oceans go anaerobic, the atmosphere would become toxic. A similar event has occurred during one or two of the past mass extinction events. Story 4. By the time AIDS was first discovered in the United States in 1981, 250,000 Americans were already infected with HIV. On the other side, one thing that not enough people know about is how significant the progress we've made in HIV treatment has been. Treatment is so good that people infected with it can get to the point where they can't even transmit it anymore. And if you're in a high-risk group like gay men, you can go on a drug that will literally make it impossible for you to catch it, even if the other person is not being treated. Story 5. Our bodies have no way of knowing that we're breathing oxygen. If I could snap my fingers and replace all the oxygen in your room with another inert gas, you wouldn't notice. You wouldn't start to choke or struggle. You'd just get sleepier and sleepier until you die. That's why carbon monoxide is so dangerous. If you have any sort of gas appliance in your building, invest in a detector. I'll never forget being out for dinner and getting a message from my roommate saying she and her boyfriend were in our apartment and starting to feel weird and tired. I told her to get out ASAP and call 911. Thankfully, she did, and everyone was okay. The gas company measured our gas furnace at over 200 parts per million CO, and the utility space was a few feet away from my roommate's bedroom. Still makes me feel nauseous to think about. Story 6. People don't talk enough about the melting permafrost and the associated positive feedback loops that only accelerate what's already started. I remember reading a paper that was collaborated/co-signed by dozens of countries' top scientists about the irreversible effects of global warming. Even if we stopped all carbon emissions now, we would still experience biblical-level environmental disasters in the next 50, 100 years. That paper really did haunt me, especially because it was like 100 pages of measurements and graphs, and you had to really search for the 2 paragraphs that talked about the floods, fires, coastal famine, population displacement, salinity of water decreasing because of the influx of fresh water from ice caps melting leading to weird climate pattern. Made it all the more legitimate. Story 7. I'm sure there are plenty of people who know this, but personally I find it terrifying AF. If the vacuum of space didn't block sound from reaching us, the sun would be as loud as a jackhammer everywhere on Earth. Everywhere at all times, and because sound travels slower than light, if the sun were to go out it would take 8 minutes for the light to stop, but 13 years for the sound to stop. So life on a cold, dead Earth for 13 years and still heard the jackhammer scream of our dead sun. Story 8. There are millions and billions of dollars in research into how to make people buy crap. The missus took a year of psychology, and what they got the most research on is how to manipulate you and me into buying crap we don't need. Mental illness we know a little about, making you want the new crap that you don't need. We know a hell of a lot about how that works. Story 9. In Yellowknife, NT Canada, there was a gold mine operating for 54 years, and a byproduct of that mining process was arsenic trioxide. 237,000 tons of it, enough to kill everything on the planet. They figured the best thing to do was to bury it in permafrost. The problem is that it's starting to get warmer, so they have to figure out what to do with it. It's not a secret. Just no one is talking about it. Story 10. Brain aneurysms can happen at any time to anyone. No matter what age you are or even how healthy you are, if you are currently alive, you have a chance of getting a brain aneurysm. When you do get one, there's a 50% chance you'll just die immediately. Like, you'd be alive 1 minute and then lying on the floor unconscious the next minute. Are the chances of actually getting a brain aneurysm at any random moment low? Yes, but it's still not zero. Story 11. Take an Astronomy 101 course at your local community college. People have no idea the amount of and variety of things that exist in space that can and do happen that would send us back to the Stone Age or outright annihilate life on Earth. I'm not talking about asteroids, comets, and solar flares. Everyone knows those. I'm talking about supernovas, gamma ray bursts, wandering planets, wandering black holes, and more, and none of it we have any ounce of control over. The good thing is the galaxy and universe are unbelievably large, so our chances of being affected by these things are quite literally astronomically low, but it ain't zero. Story 12, I'll let the others have the easy ones. The inevitable displacement of Mexico City due to the abuse and lack of fresh water. It will be an international incident of their own making, displacing roughly 20 million people. Half of their utilities infrastructure is faulty, and the current leadership has no viable way to repair and maintain their current system. It's not a matter of if, but when the system collapses. Normal groundwater reserve use is 10% for any major city, and only under dire circumstances should it be used at all. Mexico City uses almost half of its supply from groundwater reserves annually. Current projections show a complete collapse within 15 years. Story 13. The world's soil is running out of nitrogen pretty rapidly, and most farmland is essentially zombie farmland, where it would be completely unusable without fertilizer. And if we ever run out of the minerals needed for fertilizer, then we are rather screwed. And on top of that, the nutritional value of most fruit and veg isn't in a great state either. There's so much crop inbreeding. One bad virus in the US could tank production of certain crops. Story 14. All of existence, the entire universe, may be inside a quantum bubble within a larger system. Essentially, the universe exists as a unique alignment in higher dimensions like a soap bubble, and that alignment could be disrupted when it encounters an impurity, which would then propagate, unraveling all of reality as we know it in an instant. I've heard that our observations of the universe's distant past, aka the Big Bang, line up with what we would observe about a black hole from inside the black hole, a point extremely far away in both space and time where all record, all beyond ceases. It's the most interesting multiverse theory I've encountered, that every event horizon is a Big Bang and vice versa, that every black hole in our universe is itself a universe, and our universe is but one black hole in another universe, ad infinitum in both directions. Story 15. There's this concept called the false vacuum decay. Basically, you know how an electron can orbit an atom, just roll with it, and how it can orbit at a high state sometimes, then release energy and drop to a low state? That low state is called the vacuum state. It's the lowest state that a thing can be in. It's the default. But there are some examples of a false vacuum. Basically, imagine a ball rolling down a hill. The false vacuum is a little valley it gets caught in, but it could still go lower. Long story short, for various reasons, we are afraid one or more fields in our universe might be in a false vacuum state. If that false vacuum were to collapse, which could happen randomly via quantum tunneling, or if we pump enough energy in an area or through a dozen other theoretical mechanisms, then the universe as we know it goes bye-bye. Everything we know ceases to exist from that point into a bubble that expands at the speed of light, and within that bubble, nothing we know can ever exist again. It's not destruction, it's erasure and change. Within the bubble, the laws of physics will be different. Chemistry might not exist. Biological life might not be possible. Story 16. Human beings have been around for about 250,000 years. Virtually indistinguishable from us were the folks then and now, except perhaps for average height and weight, mainly due to food availability and some genetic diversity as our range slowly extended beyond Africa. But we've only had civilization for 12,000 years. Why? Agricultural settlement, which has only been made possible due to recent predictable weather patterns, which in turn has only been possible because the Earth's temperatures had now finally settled to keep the average world temperature pendulum in a so-called Goldilocks zone. If you know where and when water will be, and your animals can physically stand the heat or cold, you can farm. But no agriculture, no villages, no schools, no specialization, no central government, no money, no investment, no factories, no research, no mass distribution of food, medicine, knowledge, clothing, you name it. Nothing. Sentinel Island is for everyone everywhere, for whoever is lucky and fit enough to live for a while. So, with the unleashing of greenhouse gases and carbon and pesticides and massive freshwater ice melts into the oceans and destruction of natural pollinators, we've now pretty much guaranteed the planet 50,000, 100,000 years of violent, unpredictable, intolerable weather temperatures and natural patterns which will undermine the bedrock of all civilization, agriculture. Story 17. By 2050, all of our antibiotics will be virtually ineffective and death by infections will be the #1 killer. Right now, around 700,000 die annually from drug-resistant diseases, and that number will go up to 10 million and send us into an economic disaster if we don't fix the issue, at least according to WHO. People do not take their antibiotics correctly and stop taking them once they feel better, instead of finishing out the entire prescription, which is why bacteria can become resistant to the antibiotics, because not all of them are killed off when you don't take the full course. Story 18. The world can end by weaponized, self-replicating nanotechnology. Grey goo is a hypothetical global catastrophic scenario involving molecular nanotechnology in which out-of-control self-replicating machines consume all biomass, and perhaps also everything else on Earth, while building many more of themselves, a scenario that has been called ecophagy, the literal consumption of the ecosystem. Story 19. Our high body temperature is one of our best defenses against fungal infection. If it gets in, their molecular processes just won't be effective enough at body temperature to cause problems. But when larger and larger parts of the world are at body temperature or higher, the evolutionary pressures of fungi to bridge that gap will bring us a whole world of pathogens that we just don't have great ways to fight. Story 20. Antibiotics. We've literally exhausted all possible antibiotic treatment. There are bacteria that are already multi-drug resistant to colistin and tigecycline, which are like our salvage antibiotics at present, and there aren't new antibiotics that are approved or developed fast enough to deal with these. So, a time will come in the near future when we can't treat infections anymore, especially in hospital settings like ICUs, etc. Story 21. They may or may not be aware of this, but if you are what we consider a healthy typical adult, you have a very high chance of currently having from 2 to 4 viruses in your body right now. This is derived from statistics from the CDS. 84% approximately of adults have herpes simplex 1 or 2, but mostly 1 which sits at 67% and 2 at 17%. Regardless of whether you get herpes outbreaks or not all who are infected, the odds are against you. You likely have it much more than not. Again, note, this is for adults. That same healthy adult likely currently has the EBV virus in them. This comes to around 80% of the adult population. If you have had mono, you have it. But even if you didn't, you probably got it as a child, which may have been asymptomatic. This number is changing with vaccines for chickenpox, so I don't know if this is still higher than 80%, but I believe it is. If you have had chickenpox, you still harbor the virus. This number will decline as more of the population gets vaccinated. This one is hard to put a percent on as far as the virus being in your body right now, as it can be immunologically cleared, albeit it takes a while sometimes. That said, the family of viruses known as HPV is pretty big. Note, only a few of these are associated with cervical cancer and genital warts. The rest seem to infect us without any symptoms we have identified. Taking this group of viruses as a whole, if we test the blood of adults, we find that about 80% of adults have antibodies to an HPV virus. Again, this does not necessarily mean the particular virus is associated with cancer and warts. I don't know if a large fraction of adults would have one of these viruses in them right now, but some percentage do. I am guessing here maybe 20-30%, but could be wrong. And that is what being a healthy adult looks like at a viral level. Story 22. Just finished reading Dirt, the Erosion of Civilizations by David R. Montgomery, so soil degradation and erosion seem relevant to this question. Key figures on soil erosion. It can take up to 1,000 years to produce just 2-3 centimeters of soil. 33% of the Earth's soils are already degraded, and over 90% could become degraded by 2050, FAO and ITPS 2015, IPBES 2018. The equivalent of 1 soccer pitch of soil is eroded every 5 seconds. FAO and ITPS 2015. Estimated rates of accelerated soil erosion on arable or intensively grazed lands are 1,000 times higher than natural erosion rates. Soil erosion can lead to up to 50% loss in crop yields. The economic cost of soil degradation for the European Union is estimated to be in the order of tens of billions of euros annually. Story 23, using only 2 nuclear weapons, which could be fired from civilian ships if detonated above the atmosphere, would disable every single electronic device in the entirety of the United States that was not hardened or shielded. The EMP would be spread by the atmosphere. This is called the Compton effect, and would lead to worldwide famine, killing hundreds of millions of people, and is completely impossible to stop currently. Story 24. The cost of developing a single new drug from scratch, from idea to testing to manufacturer synthesis to market, costs about $13 billion over 10 to 15 years for it to fail at any stage. Even the ultra-wealthy would be bankrupt if they focused on developing a new drug. Most pharmaceutical companies develop new drugs from existing drugs, as this speeds things up considerably and is easier to get the new product approved for use. Some drugs may be a cure in vitro but may be toxic in animal testing, or they may be safe, but the synthesis takes 20 steps and you only get a 0.01% yield, so it'll cost too much to bring it to market. Story 25. In fully anonymous surveys of police officers in the United States, about 4 out of 5 officers admitted to actively suffering from untreated severe mental health issues resulting in PTSD, depression, ideations and attempts, aggressive behavior, domestic violence, and addictions. Government stats show 20%. Meta-analysis of studies shows about 50%. In surveys given to active police officers that were completely anonymous, the percentage averaged around 78–80%. This means nearly every officer, supervisor, detective, sergeant, lieutenant, captain, chief, and administrator is mentally and emotionally unfit to effectively perform their duties. This results in increased aggression, use of force violations, police action shootings, and self-deletion. I say this as a former police officer and with compassion in my heart for other officers. I've lost a lot of friends to self-deletion. I've seen many go to prison, fired, divorced, and more. Please get help. The job is killing you. If you want to improve law enforcement in the U.S., at a bare minimum, regular mental health evaluation treatment must be mandatory to serve. We can talk about changing laws, training, and other issues, but mental health is the root problem. More police officers die from self-deletion every year than every other cause of death combined. Story 26. How powerful is the nuclear bomb compared to the power of the Hiroshima bomb? The answer is, in addition, the destructive power of the Tsar bomb exceeds 3,300 times the destructive power of the little boy bomb that the United States used to strike the Japanese city of Hiroshima in 1945. The destructive power of the Tsar bomb is 100 megatons, or the equivalent of the explosion of 100 million tons of highly explosive TNT. If there is a nuclear war between America and Russia in the present or the future, this war will literally lead to the end of the world. Story 27. It'd cost about $50,000 to reproduce smallpox. And all the information you need is out there online. You just have to put it together. Canadian scientists did the exact thing with an extinct strain of horsepox virus in 2017, producing viable and infectious virions. English scientists in 2020 fully sequenced the smallpox genome from a museum specimen. With this knowledge, they could have used the Canadian work to reproduce smallpox. You could kill upwards of 5 billion people with it. Story 28. Replication crisis. The replication crisis, also called the replicability crisis and the reproducibility crisis, is an ongoing methodological crisis in which the results of many scientific studies are difficult or impossible to reproduce. Because the reproducibility of empirical results is an essential part of the scientific method, such failures undermine the credibility of theories building on them and potentially call into question substantial parts of scientific knowledge. Story 29. Humanity has only explored 5% of the oceans of the world, meaning the millions upon billions of known and documented marine life, and the depth of the ocean is only 5% of the total 95% of what the ocean is. We know more about space than the ocean, and for me at least it's scary because there are some scary fish in the deepest parts of our oceans, and now I know that's only 5% of the total scary fish out there. Story 30. The end Permian mass extinction was the worst in Earth's history. 70–80% of species died. It was caused by volcanic activity in Siberia spewing magma for thousands of years, releasing CO2 and igniting fossil fuel deposits as it bubbled up for good measure, leading to a runaway greenhouse effect and acidifying the oceans. Species had a better chance of surviving the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs. Today, the global climate is heating up 10x faster than it did at the end of the Permian. Story 31. Haven't seen the Boltzmann brain on here. thought experiment that says that your brain, so all of your thoughts and memories, could spontaneously be created through random thermodynamic atomic arrangements. In other words, some particles randomly form in the right way so as to create a brain. This brain contains all of the memories that you've had in life, though none of them were actually real. Almost instantaneously, this brain would be destroyed. This is possible under the laws of thermodynamics. You could be a Boltzmann brain. Story 32. Big Pharma pushed for antidepressants by framing the disease as caused by a chemical imbalance through the use of political rigging, selective trials and studies, cherry-picked data, and paid doctors who pushed for the pills as a quick solution. Antidepressants may work for many people, but how exactly, no one really knows, and they have drastic and lasting side effects, including shockingly increased depression, anxiety, and self-deletion ideation. But crucially, they don't fix depression, as is evidenced by the concurrent rise of both depression and the use of antidepressants. Story 33. I don't remember the name of the experiment or laboratory, but I remember that it was tagged as the time humanity was most close to disappearing. Basically, one research team approved his plan to test a new bacteria on a real field or virus or anything. Before that, they decided to test in a fully closed lab with real plants. All plants died in hours. If that bacteria/virus/whatever were released in an open field, it would be uncontrollable, and all plants on the planet would be dead in a month or so. Without plants, we can agree that in 2, 3, maybe 6 months, the life on this planet will disappear. Story 34. The asteroid that hit Earth wiped out dinosaurs. Apparently, it was so massive and fast that if something came towards Earth in current times, it would take exactly 3 days for us to actually know before it hit us, and we wouldn't be able to do anything to counter it. 3 days before total annihilation of humanity as we know it. Ever thought how it would be like to know your own death well? How about to know the death of pretty much 99% of the Earth? If that scenario happens again, 3 days before the asteroid hits us, with all the tech we have, we can only find our own death 3 days in advance. This is coming from the well-renowned scientist of the field who dedicated his life to research in this department.